Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of Going to Attic Space. My name is Jason Boning. I'm the owner of Uni-Serve Air Conditioning in Houston, Texas, where we maintain, repair, and replace HVAC systems. Today, I want to talk about those little tubes that are connected to your HVAC system, or the ductwork. So that's oftentimes something that gets overlooked. And when we look at an AC system, it's definitely something that we take into consideration. But like I said, it's oftentimes something that gets overlooked. A lot of times it can be something that we don't have a lot of control over, and so there's a lot of two-story homes here in the Houston area, and some of that ductwork is just crammed in between walls and in the ceiling, and we're kind of, there's not a whole lot we can do unless we're just going to, rip everything open and start, redesigning it and replacing it. So, but anyways, there are some things that we can do to help there. So what I want to do today is just kind of lay out a few things that as a homeowner you need to be aware of when it comes to your ductwork. Now, the first thing is airflow. That's what all those little tubes are connected to your system for, right? Those ducts provide airflow into the different rooms in your home. And a large part of determining how much air gets into your various rooms is the size of the duct. So obviously the bigger the duct, the more air that it can handle. But bigger is not always better, as we've talked about before, right? Just with your AC system, just because it's bigger doesn't necessarily mean it's better. And so depending on how far that run is from your system, in other words, how far that duct has to run from the plenum of your system to the space, and then also how much air it needs to carry, that all determines the size of that duct. So think about this. Just to give you an analogy, think about your water hose. If you're holding your water hose, you turn on the water, and then the water just comes out, right? And if you put your thumb over the end of it, what happens? It starts spraying, right? And so what happens when you put your thumb over the portion of the hose is it builds up static pressure, and then it can increase the velocity so that water can spray farther. And so it's very similar when we look at duct design in HVAC systems. We have to look at how far it needs to go, what velocity we need, what static pressure. All that affects how the air is going to flow into those different rooms into your home. And a lot of times, if we're being honest, not to knock on home builders or the AC guys that build homes, there's just a lot of rules of thumb that go into play into putting that ductwork into the homes. And so that's why you could end up with hot rooms, cold rooms, so on and so forth. Now, as far as things that we can do to overcome some of those design flaws, there's a couple things. And so one of the easiest things is we can install manual dampers in the start collars in the plenum. Okay, so you have a plenum that is connected to your system, and the air blows into the plenum, and then you have various start collars that connect the ductwork to that plenum. And we can take the ductwork off, so we can take a duct off of the start collar, put in a manual damper, and then adjust it to essentially close off airflow. And so what we can do there is we can close off areas that are getting a lot of air so that we can force air into other rooms. All right, so that's kind of the easiest solution, if you will. The other thing we can do is if there's one room that's just in really bad shape, is very poor design, maybe it's a bedroom with a 6-inch duct, not to get into too deep in the weeds, but that would be a really small duct for a bedroom. Is we would actually say, hey, we really need to increase the size of that duct. There's just no way, even if we force more air into there, it's just too small to get the required airflow. And so we would recommend that you actually increase the size of the duct to maybe an 8-inch or whatever. There's a lot of things that we need to take into consideration there, such as the size of the room, Does it have windows? Which direction do those windows face? So on and so forth. All right. So we can just increase the size of the duct. So just to summarize there, if you have a hot room or a cold room, we can look at adding manual dampers and adjusting those dampers so that we get more airflow, less airflow, so on and so forth. Or we may just need to increase the size of the duct altogether so that we can get more air into certain rooms. So that's kind of a quick high-level overview of airflow. The other thing that we need to be aware of is the insulation that's on that ductwork. So I don't know if you've ever heard the term R6 or R8 flex ducts. So that's R6 or R8, that's the insulation value. So the higher, going from R6 to R8 means we have a higher insulation value. It's going to be more resistant to transferring heat, which is a good thing. Because here in the greater Houston area, those attics get extremely hot. And so what can happen is over the course of a long run where you have, say, 50 to 55 degree air, and it has to travel 20, 30, 40 feet in an attic, it can pick up a lot of heat over the course of that duct run. And so that's why we want to have a lot of insulation so that it's resistant to transferring heat, or in the case of cooling, gaining heat inside your supply airflow. You also may have metal ductwork, and then it's got insulation, just an insulation wrap around it, and that insulation could be breaking down, and then we could have condensation issues. All right, we see that quite a bit here in the Houston area. So the insulation value, that's something very critical to the ductwork that we need to be aware of. The biggest thing is just to prevent condensation issues or ducts that are sweating, and then also just to make sure that we're trying to maximize the efficiency of the system. So that system's cooling the air. We actually want to get that cool air to the space and not have it warm up as it's transferring through that duct over the course of running through the attic. Another thing that just talking about ductwork and the insulation value, if you upgrade your system from a single speed system to a variable speed system, that's where we're really going to take a closer look at that ductwork. And we really recommend R8 ductwork with variable speed systems. And the reason why is because the variable speed systems run a lot more than single speed systems. And so they're able to run at lower speeds so that they can run longer, which is better for the system. It's better for conditioning air and removing moisture. They can operate a lot more efficiently. But in doing so, those ducts are almost constantly moving conditioned cold air through your home. And so if you have an attic that gets really hot, say 120, 130 degrees, and then inside the ductwork it's constantly 50 to 55 degrees, then what happens is as that heat transfers, you can actually reach the dew point on the exterior surface of that duct insulation if it's super thin. And then we can have what we call sweating ducts, or just condensation on the outside of the ductwork. And so if we replace your system with a variable speed, that's definitely something we're going to take a look at. We're going to see if we can measure the temperature of your attic and have a good idea of what it is during the summertime. Just a quick tip here. One way to overcome that we have seen is by using a solar attic fan. And so what those do is it's typically, it's just an attic fan, but it's powered by solar energy, so that when the sun is shining, then it's typically going to be heating up your attic, but it'll also turn on that attic fan. And the manufacturer that we use is Attic Breeze, and what they claim they can do is keep your attic within 10 degrees or less of the outside air temperature. And so what that does is it'll decrease the dew point of the air in your attic and can prevent condensation on ductwork. So we've had some customers that have opted to keep their R6 ductwork, or maybe even some metal ductwork with insulation, and we've been able to install a solar attic fan and keep the ducts from sweating or having condensation on that outer surface. So different things we can do if you're not thrilled about replacing your ductwork. I think Most people don't want to have to replace their AC system, and most of the time they definitely don't want to replace the ductwork. And I get it. It's there's a lot of things that a lot of expenses when it comes to home ownership. Okay, and so we try to work with everybody's budget and what they want to try to come up with a solution that's going to work for them and not create any damage in the home due to condensation or anything like that. So, anyways, ductwork is definitely something that most homeowners don't think about a lot, but it's a very critical piece to your HVAC system operating as efficiently and effectively as it can.